Imagine you're handed this uh, highly classified, heavily redacted document.
Right, with something out of a spy movie.
Exactly. The kind where someone took a thick black marker and just aggressively crossed out entire paragraphs.
I mean, their intention is pretty obvious there. They want those words silenced forever.
Yes,
Uh,
completely erased.
and
But when you hold that piece of paper up to the light, you notice something. The ink they use to cross it out is so heavy that it actually preserved the indentation of the original pen underneath.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The very act of trying to black it out permanently is exactly what trapped the original words on the page.
That is such a vivid image.
Welcome to today's deep dive, learner. That exact paradox is the foundation of our exploration today. We're looking into a really fascinating source text, and it's titled Al-Lat, the goddess before the silence.
It really is an incredible text. We are unpacking the profound history of a major pre-Islamic Arabian goddess. The source text traces, how she was worshipped up across continents, the theological reasons she was suppressed, and how her memory was accidentally preserved in the very texts that sought to erase her.
And just to set the ground rules for you listening, learner, our mission today is specifically to explore the historical and theological claims made by this source text.
Yeah, that's an important distinction.
We are just unpacking the author's arguments and the history presented in this document. We aren't here to endorse these viewpoints, or take any religious or political sides. We are operating purely as observers, reading a historical footprint.
Absolutely. And the author of the text argues that to understand a figure whose history has been so heavily redacted, you have to start at the bedrock of her identity, which is her name.
Her name. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, the text asserts that the name Al-Lat is not just a title, it's actually a grammatical assertion.
Right, because the name derives from Al-Lat.
Exactly, which translates to the goddess.
And the source points out that this is the direct grammatical feminine form of Al-Ilah, which means the god,
Right.
and Al-Ilah is the linguistic root from which the word Allah descends. So if ancient Arabic is built on a root system, think of this less like two entirely different entities and more like, I don't know, a linguistic seesaw.
A seesaw, I like that.
Yeah, they're perfectly balanced on the exact same pivot point. It's like two sides of a cosmic coin.
What's fascinating here is how the text leans so heavily on that structural equality. The author's argument is that the divine masculine and the divine feminine, they weren't opposites in this ancient context.
Right.
They were grammatical equals. For the author, this indicates the sacred feminine wasn't some, localized fringe cult or just a cultural afterthought in ancient Arabia.
Yeah.
It was baked into the very way they conceptualized the divine at a foundational linguistic level.
But wait, I have to push back on the text's logic there for a second. Just because two words share a grammatical root, does that automatically mean the people speaking those words gave them equal theological weight?
That's a really fair question.
I mean, is the author making a leap from just grammar to actual religious reality?
It is a fair critique of the premise, but the author counters that in ancient Semitic cultures, language wasn't just descriptive, it was ontological.
Meaning it defined reality.
Exactly. Naming something was defining its reality. The text actually uses the phrase, her name is not a remnant, it is a refutation.
Oh, wow. That's a strong statement.
Right. The argument is that her name alone proves she held this primary foundational status long before strict monotheism centralized divine power. But, the text doesn't rely on grammar alone.
No, it doesn't.
It moves from linguistic roots to the actual archaeological footprint of her worship.
Which takes us out of the realm of theory and straight into the dirt, because the archaeological sources show her influence spanning the Arabian Peninsula and, well, far beyond that.
Way beyond.
The Nabateans, for instance, were deeply devoted to her, and these are the people famous for carving the mercantile city of Petra into those massive rose-red cliffs in southern Jordan.
Right. They were a major civilization.
And they syncretized Al-Lat with the Greek goddess Athena.
Which is such a specific choice. The Nabateans controlled massive, highly lucrative caravan networks. They were moving frankincense, myrrh, spices.
All the high-value stuff.
Exactly. And they were moving it through some of the most dangerous and unforgiving desert territories in the ancient world.
Yeah, so they didn't need an abstract deity up in the clouds.
No, they needed a highly functional one. Athena is the Greek goddess of wisdom, warfare, and civic intelligence.
Civic intelligence.
Right. By syncretizing Al-Lat with Athena, the Nabateans were projecting their need for a protective, tactical intelligence, one that could guard trade routes and, enforce civic order in a really harsh environment.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We see that civic function even more clearly when she shows up in Palmyra.
Yes, Palmyra is a great example.
Because Palmyra was this massive oasis city in the Syrian desert. It was basically a cosmopolitan crossroads, blending Semitic, Babylonian, and Hellenistic cultures.
A huge melting pot.
Exactly. And in Palmyra, she is worshipped in a divine triad alongside the gods Bel and Aglabal. The depictions of her here are just striking.
They really are.
She is shown in full Greco-Roman style. She's wearing a helmet, she's fully armored, carrying a spear, and she's flanked by lions.
And the author points out a critical nuance regarding those lions, which I thought was fascinating.
Oh, right, because normally female deities are shown differently.
Yeah, in classical iconography, female deities are so often depicted holding sheaves of wheat, or maybe they're surrounded by doves to symbolize fertility.
But Allah has lions.
Right. And she isn't taming them or hunting them, she just stands beside them.
Like they're just her natural companions.
Exactly. The text argues the lion represents internalized regal sovereignty. It is raw, lethal force that has been brought under control and made majestic.
But see, it seems like a massive contradiction to me. The source text describes this famous relief from Palmyra, where she is heavily armored and flanked by a lion, but her hand is raised in blessing over a soldier. And the inscription explicitly asks her to bless whoever does not shed blood in her sanctuary.
Yeah, that inscription is famous.
I mean, she is literally covered in weapons, but demanding pacifism. It feels like she's trying to be two completely different gods at once.
Well, it looks like a contradiction to our modern eyes, but the text argues that to migrating peoples and desert merchants, power and protection were the exact same function.
Oh, I see.
If you run a massive international trading hub like Palmyra, you need a deity strong enough to enforce a weapon-free zone.
You need the thread of the spear to enforce the peace.
Exactly. The author's point is that she authorizes the sword in the wild, but she also has the absolute authority to consecrate the space where the sword must be set down.
Wow.
She doesn't have to choose between ultimate power and ultimate protection because she administers both depending on where you are standing.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. And the Greeks saw this dual nature, too. Herodotus wrote about her in the 5th century BCE, and he equated her with Aphrodite Urania.
Right, the celestial sovereign Aphrodite.
Yeah. But this raises a huge question about her origins. Because Palmyra and Petra give us this heavily armored, Hellenized, very cosmopolitan version of the goddess.
The big city version.
Exactly. What happens when we strip away the Roman armor? What did her worship look like in its oldest, most elemental form out in the deep desert?
The source text takes us to the highlands of Taif to answer that. And in her most elemental form, she was tied to the sun, the rain, and the living earth.
Very elemental.
Yes. In Semitic languages, the sun is grammatically feminine. The word is shams.
Shams.
And Al-Lat was viewed as a life-giving solar force governing warmth and the turning of the seasons. And she was also invoked as a rain caller.
Which is huge. Calling rain in an arid desert climate is holding the absolute deepest survival pressure all society can experience.
I mean, absolutely, it's everything.
A rain caller isn't just managing the weather, They are managing the thin line between life and death for an entire region.
Yeah.
And in Taif, which was her primary sanctuary, the text notes her presence was embodied by an aniconic white cubic rock.
And the author uses this rock to address a major misconception. Historically, outside observers often labeled the worship of undifferentiated stones as a, primitive form of religion.
Right, like they just didn't know how to carve statues yet.
Exactly. But the text argues it is actually a highly sophisticated, completely different epistemology of the sacred.
Okay, hold on. Epistemology of the sacred is a pretty heavy academic phrase.
Fair enough.
Are you just saying they believed the divine was physically inside the rock rather than hovering somewhere up in the sky?
Basically, yes.
Huh.
It's the concept of immanence. The text explains that they didn't believe the divine needed to be carved into a human face to be real.
Okay.
Transcendence is the idea that God is separate from the world, looking down from above. Immanence is the belief that the sacred is already rooted in matter.
So the rock wasn't just a symbol.
No, the rock wasn't a symbol of the goddess at all. It was the site of her literal, heavy presence on the earth.
And that physical presence extended to the surrounding environment, too. That white stone in Taif was associated with the sacred acacia tree.
Yes, the acacia.
Which is a brutally dense, hardy tree. It survives in near waterless conditions and is protected by these long, vicious thorns.
Right. In ancient Near Eastern traditions, sacred trees frequently mark the site of a goddess's imminence. They function as living pillars connecting the earth to the sky.
Oh.
And the physical space around this tree and the stone was designated as a haram, which is an inviolable sacred zone.
I want to focus on the mechanics of that haram for a second, because the text explains that all tribal violence had to be suspended the moment someone stepped inside the sanctuary limits.
Yes.
Enemies had to literally lay down their weapons. This wasn't just a quaint religious custom. This was a profound piece of political theology.
It was entirely practical.
Yeah. In a region governed by tribal warfare and blood feuds, the sanctuary functioned as a literal demilitarized zone.
The text argues the goddess required stillness. The haram protected the trees, sure, but more importantly, it protected anyone who managed to reach it. It forced warring factions to pause. It allowed for diplomacy, trade, and negotiation to happen without the threat of immediate violence.
And because she was so deeply embedded in the daily survival and the peacemaking of her people, she held a very specific, highly coveted job in the ancient cosmological structure.
The intercessor.
Yes, the intercessor. But as strict monotheism began to centralize power in the region, that specific function of intercession became a massive flashpoint.
The source text contextualizes this by looking at the broader theological structure. Al-Lat was actually part of a triple goddess grouping.
Right, there were three of them.
Yeah, alongside Al-Uzza, who embodied fierce solar power and the morning star, and Manat, who was the goddess of fate and time.
And collectively, regional tribes referred to them as the daughters of Allah.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? The text paints a picture of a cosmology that operates almost like a corporate structure.
That's a really good analogy.
In the pre-Islamic mindset, Allah was positioned as a remote high god, kind of like a corporate CEO up in the penthouse, completely abstracted from the day-to-day operations.
All right.
Al-Lat and her sisters were the responsive middle management. They were the ones that people actually spoke to every single day. They heard the prayers, they managed the local sanctuaries, and they interceded with the high god on behalf of humanity.
They held the relational power. They were the active, living bridge between the divine and the human.
Yeah.
And the source text argues this is exactly why they became such a threat to emerging monotheism. Which brings us to a really complex historiographical debate covered in the text.
The Quranic incident.
Yes, commonly referred to as the Quranic incident or the Satanic Verses episode.
And we should reiterate our impartiality disclaimer right here. The text explores this purely as a historical and theological debate that was recorded by early Islamic historians like Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Sa'd.
Right.
We are just looking at how the text frames this historical tension. We aren't taking a theological stance on it.
Exactly. According to the early historiography cited by our source, there was a brief moment early in the monotheistic prophetic mission where verses were recited that appeared to affirm the intercession of these three goddesses.
Okay.
The verses referred to them as exalted cranes whose intercession is to be hoped for.
Exalted cranes. But those verses were later withdrawn.
Yes.
The historical explanation given was that they were inserted into the recitation through supernatural interference by Shaitan, or Satan.
Right.
And I keep coming back to a question the text raises here. Why did it have to be framed as satanic? Why couldn't the new theology just say, hey, you've been praying to the wrong thing, these goddesses just don't exist?
This raises an important question. The author's argument is that the cultural reliance on intercession was just too deeply ingrained to wave away.
You could just delete the job.
Exactly. To establish strict monotheism, the bridge between humanity and the divine had to be fundamentally restructured. You couldn't just call the goddesses a mistake. Their capacity to hold space between the human and the divine, which they had literally done for centuries, had to be actively redefined as a corruption engineered by the ultimate enemy.
Wow. And the text points out that later Islamic scholarship broadly rejected the Quranic incident as a fabrication.
Yes, they did.
But the author argues the mere existence of this historiographical debate is what really matters.
Exactly. It illustrates how profoundly difficult it was to untangle these goddesses from the regional theology.
The early historians felt compelled to account for the massive friction of this transition.
And the text makes a brilliant observation about the function of intercession itself. The architecture of the sacred didn't change. Humanity still needed someone to intercede for them.
He still needed middle management.
Exactly. The function was simply transferred, masculinized, and reassigned to other figures within the new monotheistic framework, like prophets and angels.
So the theological job remained, but the goddess who originated it was removed.
That's the argument, yeah.
But theological debates, eventually hit a breaking point where words are no longer enough.
Yeah, they usually do.
This escalating tension inevitably led to physical confrontation. Which brings us to the fall of Taif, the destruction of Al-Lat's sanctuary, and the ultimate paradox of her legacy.
Right.
Because in 630 CE, a military expedition was sent to demolish the haram at Taif.
And the source outlines how the Thaf tribe, who were the custodians of her temple, attempted to negotiate their surrender.
They didn't just hand over the keys.
No,
No.
not at all. They asked to keep the temple standing for 3 years.
That's 3 years.
When that was denied, they asked for 1 year. And when they finally realized the destruction was totally inevitable, they begged to be exempt from personally swinging the hammers to destroy it.
I really want to look at the why behind that desperation.
Yeah.
Why negotiate so hard for a single temple?
It wasn't just religion.
Right. The text suggests this wasn't just about losing a religious idol. It was a massive socioeconomic and geopolitical loss.
Absolutely.
The sanctuary was a demilitarized zone. It brought trade, it brought pilgrims, and it gave the Thaqif tribe enormous regional leverage as peacekeepers.
Yeah.
Losing the goddess meant losing their political neutrality and their entire economic engine.
And beyond the politics, the source documents the emotional reality on the ground. Women in Taif openly mourned the destruction of the temple.
Wow.
The author emphasizes that this wasn't the behavior of people just discarding an outdated superstition. This was documented communal grief over the loss of a fiercely protective maternal figure who had anchored their society for generations.
So they tore down the temple and they broke the sacred stones. But the source text asks a pivotal question here. Did smashing the physical objects actually achieve the erasure they were aiming for?
That is the big question.
Because destroying a building is very different from destroying an idea.
And the text arrives at a profound paradox here. To fully dismantle the theological hold Al-Lat had on the region, the new monotheistic tradition had to address her directly in its own foundational scripture.
Right. Her name is explicitly written into the Quran. In Surah An-Najm, verses 19 and 20, the text asks rhetorically, "Have you then considered Al-Lat and Al-Uzza and Manat the third the other?"
Yeah.
And the verses surrounding it basically dismiss the goddesses as mere invented names devoid of real power.
But the author's central argument is that the argument against her required her to be legible.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
You don't mount a complex theological refutation against a figure who poses zero threat. The scripture had to speak her name in order to dismiss her.
She is the refuted thesis. That concept from the text really stuck with me.
It's powerful.
If you write a thesis refuting an idea, the document inherently preserves the idea it's trying to destroy.
Yes.
You cannot erase a historical figure if you are forced to literally write them into your holy book to argue against them. By placing her name into the foundational document of the tradition that replaced her, she was permanently embedded in it.
Exactly.
As long as those verses are recited, the name Al-Lat continues to be spoken.
According to the text, she survived the transition from polytheism to monotheism within the very language and scripture of that monotheism.
Wow.
She shares a grammatical root with Allah, and her name sits securely inside the scripture that displaced her worship. The author concludes that this proves the sacred feminine was actively, deliberately removed from the theology of the Middle East, yet structurally and linguistically, it was impossible to erase her completely.
It is an incredible journey the text takes us on. I mean, we started with a linguistic seesaw balancing Al-Ilahat and Al-Ilah.
We did.
We explored the mercantile necessity of a heavily armored protector in Palmyra and unpacked the profound political theology of the demilitarized sanctuary in Taif.
Right.
We examined the massive theological friction of the Quranic incident and finally the paradox of her textual survival.
The author really leaves us with a compelling argument that language and scripture are always repositories of what came before them, even when they are actively trying to pave over the past.
Which brings me right back to our redacted document learner.
The spy document.
Yeah, the heavy black ink meant to hide the words is exactly what trapped the indentations on the page forever.
It's a perfect metaphor.
It leaves us with a really powerful question, inspired by our source text. If refuted ideas are permanently preserved in the very texts that try to erase them, what other hidden histories are out there?
Oh, man.
What forgotten deities or entirely different ways of seeing the world are secretly trapped inside the founding documents of our own cultures, just waiting for us to read them in reverse?